The assassination of President John F. Kennedy has haunted us for well over 60 years. But was there one woman who knew what really happened that day in Dallas, and who as a result was to pay with her life? Let's return to the events of Dallas 63 here on Things Visible and Invisible. Writer, attorney and investigative reporter Mark Shaw has dedicated the last 15 years to probing the truth about JFK and the Lee Harvey Oswald assassinations. The author of more than 30 books, including The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, The Mysterious Death of What's My Line TV star and media icon Dorothy Kilgallen. His latest work is entitled Abuse of Power and connects the deaths of the Kennedys, Marilyn Monroe and Kilgallen. And he joins me down the line from his home in California. Mark, welcome back to Things Visible and Invisible.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Mark, the last time we spoke, you were giving a very interesting exposition on your ideas around the JFK assassination. You linked it to the mafia and you named the person in the mafia who you suspected to be the prime mover behind that assassination. However, then we started talking about Dorothy and her involvement with this case. Can you very briefly just give us an idea of why she got involved in this case in the first place?
Thank you for the lead in. Basically, I feel like my research, there's no speculation or innuendo or anything. It's based on primary sources, credible sources and everything. And I'm so fortunate that I found out about Dorothy Kilgallen, who, is the most renowned journalist, I think, who ever lived. The New York Post called her the most powerful female voice in America. She was a journalist for a New York newspaper and all of that. But to get to your question, one of the reasons that she got involved with the JFK assassination is because she and JFK were very good friends. He had actually come to her home for parties. She had seen him in the social scene in New York City. And the biggest thing that came about that really got her nose into all of this, and she was one who, went after the truth, was the fact that he permitted Dorothy and her young son, Kerry, who was in the third grade, to come to the White House. JFK made a big fuss over Kerry, bringing letters from his third grade class and all of that, and gave him a PT 109 pin, all of that. So when JFK died, it was personal for Dorothy. And actually, in the first column that she wrote, she said, I remember a tall man who stooped over a little boy, my son from the third grade, talking about his letter. This is the man who was assassinated in Dallas. So Dorothy Kilgallen, who had covered some of the main trials, high-profile trials at the time, the Charles Lindbergh case, the one that became the one that became the I can't think of the name of it anyway, a big television series that and everything. She covered all those big trials, and so she was really upset about what happened to JFK, and she went to Dallas. Now, I tell most people that I have an advantage over any of the other so-called experts because they weren't there, I wasn't there, but Dorothy Kilgallen was. And in my book, starting with the best-selling The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, and now to Abuse of Power, the one coming out later this year, you can read Dorothy's columns. You can see video of her there. You can see her interviewing the Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry. And then, as you know, it culminated in the fact that she was a reporter who was at the Jack Ruby trial. She got to know Jack Ruby. She's the only reporter out of 400 who interviewed Ruby, and what she found out then led to her checking out on one of the mafioso named Carlos Marcello. She went to New Orleans. He had the greatest motive to have killed JFK so that Bobby Kennedy would be powerless, and that's what Dorothy Kilgallen brings to the table, and what I've been able to put in my books, because it's all firsthand, no speculation type of evidence.
Now, there's an awful lot in what you said there, Mark, and I want to unpack it a little bit. First of all, I mean, I get it that Dorothy was friends with the Kennedys, but there were a lot of friends of the Kennedys. Not many of them actually went to Dallas and started doing the investigative work that you've outlined there. But a lot of people did descend on Dallas, and a lot of people have speculated since. But most of them have used either Kennedy or Lee Harvey Oswald as the main conduit to the journey they're on. She went a different way. Why did she hone in on Jack Ruby as the key to the JFK assassination?
Well, ever since the Warren Commission, that bogus conclusion they came up that it was Oswald alone, which has been proven over and over to not be, not be the truth. And I've put new information about that, just destroying that myth in Abuse of Power that'll be out later this year. But Dorothy did not believe right from the outset. After she talked to Jesse Curry, the Dallas police chief, she was very good. When I was a former criminal defense lawyer, I looked for these little clues that could uncover the truth, talk about motive and all of that. And the first thing she found out from Jesse Curry, who was in the limousine, I believe, right behind the one where JFK was killed, he told her the shots did not come from the book depository. They came from the grassy knoll or the overhead pass, which would have meant that the shooters were shooting towards JFK's face, not towards his back. And that said to her, hey, something's wrong. And the first column she wrote, which I have in front of me, was justice is a big rug. When you pull it out from under one man, a lot of others fall too. And she then went on this against the grain of everybody shouting Oswald alone, including J. Edgar Hoover. And that was the difference there, because she was looking for evidence that would prove, how JFK was killed and why, instead of going down that dead end, which was the Oswald conclusion, which I must tell you, unfortunately, this new task force on government secrets in our country, which is supposed to bring us the truth about the JFK assassination, they're going on down the same road. And they're not looking at any alternatives like Marcello or whatever that way. So I'm afraid that we're repeating in our country what the Warren Commission did, which has been proved in my books and others, had nothing to do with the truth.
Talk to me a little bit, Mark, about Dorothy and Jack Ruby. They had a sort of unlikely rapport, I think.
Yeah, the difference between what I talked to you about and now is this. I really believe that when she talked to Jack Ruby, he asked to see her. Dorothy was the star, besides being, a great journalist on a TV show called What's My Line, which guesses unusual occupations for people and things like that. In fact, it's gotten so popular, it's on Prime TV now. And people can watch her on there. But Jack Ruby watched What's My Line at his Carousel Club. And so he knew who she was. He was very respectful of her, admired her. So when he saw her at his trial, he had her called over, and his co-counsel, Joe Tannehill, said, Jack Ruby would like to talk to you. And so they developed a rapport. She actually talked to him 3 or 4 times, very short time. But I believe now, based on my evidence that I've found, it not only did she head her in the right direction, I think she confessed to him basically what had happened, that Marcello was in control of orchestrating JFK's death, and then they went ahead and recruited Jack Ruby to assassinate Lee Harvey Oswald. Because if you think about how the mafia works, this was a mafia hit, JFK was. So then you have to close the doors, don't you, like they do. First thing was to get rid of Oswald. The second thing was with Ruby, you had to make him look crazy at trial. So those particular loose ends are buttoned up. And as we will find out when we talk about her death, she was the only loose end left, because she was writing a book for Random House that would have exposed Marcello and J. Edgar Hoover for covering up the JFK assassination.
What was the kind of reaction, before we get into that, Mark, what was the kind of reaction of, we had the Warren Commission, which came out with a very clear idea of what happened. There was a certain, shall we say, orthodoxy about the events of November in Dallas, 63. What was the kind of reaction, if any, to somebody like Dorothy, who was a celebrity, very much a celebrity, but also a very, very important journalist, investigative reporter. What was the kind of establishment's reaction to somebody like that who was sniffing around, who may have been saying there was more to see than people were saying?
Well, I'm telling my age. I just turned 80, but I was around when JFK was killed. And the first thing out of J. Edgar Hoover's mouth was Oswald alone. So everybody, gathered for that particular conclusion. They wanted it to be over. They didn't want to think there was some other people out there. So all the newspapers, all the media, I found a 60 Minutes program that 3 hours all about Oswald. I mean, they were all tricked by J. Edgar Hoover to believe Oswald alone because he didn't want anybody to believe there was any sort of a conspiracy or whatever you want to call it, any problem with a plot to kill JFK because that made the FBI look bad. So here's everybody going this way, and then there's Dorothy Kilgallen going that way. And I will tell you, based on my research and my books, I think there's going to be 7 of them now based on the Dorothy Kilgallen and JFK and Robert Kennedy's death and all that. I've been ostracized as well at times. There have been those journalists out there and those authors whose books are just packed with Oswald alone who don't want to hear from me. So you can imagine what it was like for her because nobody was cooperating with her in the mainstream media at all. She was the outlaw, like I've been in some ways. But when you believe in the truth, as we both do, Dorothy and I, you keep going forward to find that truth.
Well, did her investigation hurt her career?
No, it didn't at all. I think it didn't because she had such respect. It was the Dr. Sam Shepard case that I was thinking about. That became The Fugitive on TV. She covered that. She covered the Lindbergh baby kidnapping case. Her newspaper column was syndicated to 200 newspapers across the country. She had a TV show watched by 10 million people every Sunday night. She had her own radio show. She was so admired by everybody that I think there were those who felt like, well, she may not really know the truth about the assassination, but we're going to give her a break on there because we love her because of who she was otherwise. So I think that's how she got away with it, because of that admiration. There's a great photograph in first, I think, Collateral Damage, then in Fighting for Justice, and now in Abuse of Power. She's standing in the middle of the courtroom at the Dr. Sam Shepard case. And for your viewers that don't know, that was a famous case because he was a doctor and he supposedly killed his wife and all that. She's standing in the middle of the courtroom, and all of these reporters are gathered around her, just looking it up at her like she's a hero. Like that's the kind of journalist that you want. Oh, how many people, I've gotten almost 5,000 emails from people around the country. And what do they say? Boy, I wish we had a journalist like Dorothy Kilgallen today. Amen.
Well, I mean, her status and her fame may have insulated her to some degree, but perhaps as well, it also made her a target of suspicion for the establishment, would you say?
Yes, and you have to think about what's going on. Here's everybody else going, they're getting into the J. Edgar Hoover camp of Oswald alone. And here's this little woman running around saying, wait a minute, in all of her columns, people will be interested in, especially Collateral Damage and Abuse of Power. She wrote 15 columns about the JFK assassination, blasting the Oswald alone theory. And so who's out there watching? Well, J. Edgar Hoover is for sure. He called her a dirty columnist at one point. Carlos Marcello is watching. Anybody else who's connected to the JFK assassination is watching. That's why near the end of her life, after she'd gone to New Orleans, she said, if the wrong people knew what I know about the assassination and cost me my life, I'm afraid for my life. Somebody is going to kill me. I've bought a gun, and so on and so forth. So she knew at the end of her life, and she was warned to stop doing this and working on a book for Random House. But Dorothy was a woman of the truth, and it ended up costing her life.
Well, we're probably going to get into that on another episode. But just very quickly, Mark, because we're running out of time, but Talk to me a little bit about the timescale we've got here. Kennedy's assassination is November 63. The Warren Commission is the end of 64. When did Jack Ruby die then?
Well, I really appreciate your doing your homework. There's always been questions about Jack Ruby's death because a lot of people believe he was poisoned. I believe it's in the first part of 1965, but I could be wrong about that. We can certainly look it up. But there are those who thought that, Jack Ruby was killed, was murdered. I don't believe that was true. He ended up in prison. If you remember, he wanted to go to Washington and talk to the Chief Justice Warren, who was the head of the Warren Commission, who was as corrupt as the others. I could go through all of the information that I found about the corruption at the Warren Commission, but that's what he wanted to do. They wouldn't let him do that. At one point, he said, I can never tell the truth about what happened because blah, 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 blah. We had Oswald as a patsy. Jack Ruby was a patsy. We're going to find out that in my new book, Abuse of Power, that Sirhan was a patsy in the Robert Kennedy death. So, he was in prison. He tried to kill himself 3 times by running headfirst into cement walls in his cell. And then he was diagnosed with cancer. Now, his brother believed that he was injected with cancer, but I don't think any proof has ever been there. But Dorothy had a lot of compassion for Jack Ruby. They had become friends. I mean, here's a guy who killed somebody. People might wonder about that. But she had compassion for him because she believed that he had been used. He had been used to close Lee Harvey Oswald's mouth about being recruited to kill JFK, if he really did. And now there's more questions as to whether that happened.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there for the moment, Mark, because when we pick this up again, we're going to look at what happened to Dorothy and the tragic end that came to her. It does seem that everybody that gets involved with the JFK assassination, it doesn't turn out good for them. But for now, Mark, tell people where they can find out more about you and where they can pick up a copy of your many books.
Well, that's very kind of you. Basically, my books are at markshawbooks.com. Markshawbooks.com. All of them are up there. You can take a look. And I tell people, buy a used copy or go to, you can go to YouTube, for instance. I'm pleased to say, I don't want to be bragging, but there are 15 million views of my presentations, interviews about those books up on YouTube. So you can do that. But please, after this broadcast, there's questions you're going to have. You may think I'm a real dope, whatever it is. I don't care. I've got almost 5,000 emails from around the world, and I get tips from people and all that. It's mshawin at yahoo.com. mshawin@yahoo.com. Yeah, there's no question about that. One of those people on the panel of What's My Line was a guy named Bennett Cerf. He was the founder and publisher of Random House. And he gave her $10,000, which wasn't, doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a lot back in 1965, to write a book about the JFK assassination. Now, here's the kicker to that. People have said to me, well, what was she going to write about? Was she going to write about the CIA? Was she going to write about the Cubans? Was she going to write about Lyndon Johnson? Anybody, any of those as suspects in JFK's death? But no, she wasn't. And here's why, and here's how we know. We don't have, an actual recording or notes that Dorothy had, because those were later stolen when she died, as was the manuscript. But what did she do after she talked to Jack Ruby? Where did she go? She didn't go to Washington, D.C. to look into the establishment. She didn't stay in Dallas to look into Johnson. She didn't go to Miami to look into Cubans. She didn't look into the CIA. She went to New Orleans. And that's where Carlos Marcello ruled his kingdom, a billionaire at the time. And he was the one that the Kennedys double-crossed when Robert Kennedy became Attorney General. The mafia, including Marcello and Trafficante and others, they helped him win that that election in 1960. So the deal was, you help us, we'll leave you alone. But Robert Kennedy, who hated the mafia, right after he was appointed, deported Marcello to Central America. And when Marcello came back, he charged him with conspiracy and all of it. You can't do that with these kinds of guys, these mafioso. You can't get away with something like that. So Dorothy quickly realized that he had the greatest motive, and that's what I always looked at when I was a criminal defense lawyer, motive, to have assassinated JFK so Bobby would be powerless. So she trots on down through an airplane to New Orleans. And accompanying her is her confidant and hairdresser, Mark Sinclair. And people can go to the DorothyKilgallenStory.org, DorothyKilgallenStory.org, and you can see a lot of videos, and one of them is with Mark Sinclair. And he went with her to New Orleans. And right away, he knew she was in trouble because she called him at the hotel and said, "You go back to New York City and don't tell anybody you came here with me. Don't ask me any more questions," and so on and so forth. And that's what he did, because she had uncovered, while being in New Orleans, I think she connected not only Marcello and his brother and two compatriots of his, but also Oswald. I have an eyewitness account in Abuse of Power that comes out later this year about Marcello with Oswald and Ruby and so on and so forth. She connected all that. So now she is a lethal woman. She's a lethal person who's going to throw all of this into this book for Random House. And of course, we're never going to know, because the manuscript was stolen right after Hoover and Marcello raided her apartment and took all those things, and they've never been seen since. I've been trying to find them. But that's what she was going to put in that book. And they could never let her write that book.
Talk to me, Mark, about the circumstances of Dorothy's death.
Well, this is when I get pretty upset, so I'll be careful. Dorothy Kilgallen died in 1965 in a bedroom she never slept in, which was next to her makeup room. She had on her eyelashes, her fake hairdo, her makeup, her earrings. She was dressed like she was going out on a date. She was found in bed by Mark Sinclair, the hairdresser. And there was no question it was a staged death scene. And over the years, I've been able to prove more about that. The medical examiner's office quickly did an autopsy. And if you only do an autopsy, you think something's wrong, but they did an autopsy. And then they came back with the conclusion. They found an empty bottle of Seconal, which were, sleeping pills on the nightstand. They decided she had overdosed on drugs. And the conclusion was something like overdosed on drugs, circumstances undetermined. Well, my research, one of the people I interviewed was Michael Baden, who was one who signed the autopsy, the famous forensic scientist. He told me recently, and it's in the new book, Abuse of Power, they didn't know what happened. The other thing is that there were more tests done on her system because they had saved some of her bodily fluids 3 years later, and they found Seconal, phenobarbital, and Tuinal. They were deadly, lethal barbiturates in her system. And I'm so pleased to say that I have videotaped interviews of 4 or 5 people who were at the medical examiner's office at the time who swear that it was controlled by the mafia, controlled by those people who knew Marcello and so on and so forth. So there was never an investigation. Now, I have tried over the years to get 2 DAs in New York City to investigate. I've tried to get the Attorney General of New York State to investigate. I've tried everybody I can think of to investigate this death. But unfortunately, again, these are people who go along with the party story. They still believe it was Oswald alone. Why do we give a damn about Dorothy Kilgallen?
What do you think, or how do you think the death of Dorothy was orchestrated? Who was behind it? And I know this is supposition, but what, with all your researches and the various people you've spoken to, who do you think was behind it, and what were they hoping to achieve?
Well, I don't think it's really supposition anymore, and I'll tell you why. Again, I hate to keep messing it, but a lot of this is in Abuse of Power. What we were able to find out now was that there was one man behind the deaths of JFK, Dorothy, and Robert Kennedy. Not so much Marilyn Monroe. I've tied that in. But there's a similarity that I found between those three deaths. And there were three patsies used: Oswald in the JFK assassination, Dorothy Kilgallen's love interest at the time, a guy named Ron Pataki, and with Bobby Kennedy, no question about it, Sirhan. That's why the cover page of the book says that I have uncovered evidence that Sirhan deserves a new trial. So I found that pattern in each of those particular cases. And you can go look at the autopsies. You can look at how they were covered up. They're so similar with regard to what happened. So there's no question in my mind, and I know there will be people that will object to this, but Carlos Marcello was very smart. And so he masterminded these assassinations using those patsies. What did he do with JFK? Well, he used Oswald, and then he shut Oswald's mouth after recruiting him, and then because Ruby killed him. In Dorothy Kilgallen's case, Ron Pataki was a man who had gambling problems. Marcello found out about those. They compromised him, and he is the one that met with Dorothy Kilgallen on the last night of her life and accompanied her to her hotel, and that's where we believe he deposited the capsules, uncovered capsules of Tulinol, phenobarbital, and phenobarbital and Nebutol in a vodka and tonic drink of hers, and that's what killed her. With Bobby Kennedy, Sirhan did not shoot Robert Kennedy, and I have been able to prove that through new evidence which connects Sirhan, who worked at a racetrack in California, Santa Anita, where Marcello and his compatriot Mickey Cohen controlled the racetracks. They were able to find out that Sirhan was broke, had gambling debts and things like that. And I have actually connected Sirhan to two of Marcello's hoodlums. That's the word that was used in this eyewitness account that I found. About 3 days before Bobby Kennedy was killed. And the real kicker there, and if Dorothy would have been alive, she would have done the same thing I did. There's one thing about the Bobby Kennedy assassination that nobody is able to never figure out. When Sirhan was arrested, even though he was unemployed, he had 4 crisp $100 bills in his pocket. Who gave him that money? And the other thing is that I've found now new ballistics tests that show for certain that Sirhan was behind Robert Kennedy, not in front of him. And there's no way that based on the ballistics and everything, he could have killed Robert Kennedy.
I mean, what you're saying is fascinating, but also slightly startling, Mark. And the reason is that these are, major events. Certainly the Kennedy assassinations are major events in American history. And what you're suggesting, I think, is that the death of the Kennedys and Dorothy was basically a mob revenge act.
Yeah, and based on motive, so people are probably going to wonder, okay, what's the motive in the JFK assassination? Well, you render Bobby Kennedy powerless because his brother's dead, and he never went after the mafia. If you look at Dorothy's death, Pataki was compromised, and he never said anything, but the motive there for Marcello is he can't let her write that book. With Bobby Kennedy, it's quite interesting because he wanted to kill Bobby Kennedy in 1963, I've been able to prove. But he didn't do that. He got rid of JFK. But now you're 5 years later, and what is the motive? Bobby Kennedy is what? He's running for president. And he just won the California primary. And so Marcello knows that if he's elected president, Bobby Kennedy will come after him with everything the government has. So he can't let that happen. And so he's got to orchestrate the death of Bobby Kennedy to button that up, which is what the mafia is famous for, going down to just small killings on the street. But in something like this, he was a very powerful mafia don. And through my new evidence in abuse of power, I've been able to prove that he was the one who, because of common sense logic, which I have and Dorothy certainly have, there's no question he was the one that was responsible.
Do you not think in the case of Dorothy, though, Mark, that the mafia or the mob or Carlos Marcello, they could have taken a different approach rather than killing her? You know, there are other ways in which you can silence people. There's other ways in which you can discredit people. Murder seems a very sort of ruthless approach to what was effectively a celebrity journalist who was about to publish a book.
You know, I really appreciate your intelligence and your background and your investigation and everything coming on the program, because a lot of people at Interviewee don't do that. You just asked a great question. I'll tell you what, I don't think they were going to kill her. I think they had decided that there were other means to do that, and then this is what happened. Just about a week and a half before she died, she woke up one morning and she saw that, you know, she'd gotten death threats and other kind of things, but she woke up one morning and there was her loving son, Kerry, in a photograph on one of the main New York newspapers, I think it was the New York Times, running by himself across Central Park. And she just yelled and screamed, what in the world is going on? Because she knew what? Somebody was following her dear son. And I believe that was the final warning to her that said, you know, you can't go any further with this, because if you do, we're going to kill your son. Now, she should have stopped. And people say, why didn't she stop? Because she thought she was, you know, immune to any possibility of somebody killing her, and she was absolutely wrong. But I think that's why they went to that extreme, and then they set up Pataki to insert those deadly barbiturates in her drink, and that's what killed her.
Talk to me about the reaction to Dorothy's death. Let's begin with the Kennedys. What was Robert Kennedy's reaction?
Oh, they never mentioned it. The Kennedys never mentioned it, and you know, none of the Kennedys. I've tried to get Caroline Kennedy to know that I believe I have the, you know, as close to the common sense truth about what happened to her father. Never heard from her. None of the Kennedys know. They were not about to go ahead and get involved in any of that. That's why Bobby Kennedy never investigated his brother's death, because they had a lot of skeletons in the closet. Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger. Joe Kennedy hung out with Nazis when he was in Great Britain as, you know, your country, as ambassador. Bobby Kennedy was responsible, as I've shown in my books, and especially in Collateral Damage, responsible for Marilyn Monroe's death, because he had gotten involved in her in a romantic relationship after JFK did, and then she was going to go to the media with all of the things that Robert Kennedy had told her and JFK had told her about killing Fidel Castro. They couldn't let her go to the media. And then the whole situation that you find with Bobby Kennedy, you know, he thought he was immune. He thought, stupidly, he thought that Carlos Marcello, there's no way he would come after Bobby, and he was wrong as well.
What about wider, outside that sort of realm? I mean, what was the public reaction to the death of Dorothy at the time? Did people consider it mysterious, or was it just a misadventure?
Boy, that's the puzzle. And I have to tell you, I recently had quite a surprise, because I didn't even know that this person existed. But recently, one of my supporters, one of my people who've read my books or whatever, said, you know, I've been communicating with Dorothy Kilgallen's granddaughter on Instagram. And I told her about you, and she'd like to talk to you. About 2 Sundays ago, I was able to spend 2 hours on the phone with this woman who I don't want to identify. But I talked to her about it. And it leads into what you're talking about. At the time Dorothy died, unfortunately, you know, we hope if people say things about us that we know aren't true and they're derogatory, that our friends and people that we're close to will say, wait a minute, I know Mark Shaw. He wouldn't do that, okay? He wouldn't do that. With Dorothy, the whole situation, they said that she overdosed on drugs. Some even said she committed suicide. So people, you would think, you know, her friends, her family, people at What's My Line, people at the newspaper and everything, her family would stand up for her and everything and look into this. Not a one of them did. And not a one of them ever has that I've communicated with. And the reason is that they give Well, we knew that it was we knew it was Carlos Marcello or the mafia that killed her. We were afraid they were going to come after us. Well, I don't buy that. And I've been really disappointed in family members through the years. I haven't talked this over with this granddaughter yet, but I don't know if she'll want to get involved at all. I ended up being the only one who stood up for Dorothy, as I continue to do today, because I really believe that the truth needs to be known, and I will continue based on what's in the new book to see if I can't get an investigation as well. But that's been their excuse, and I don't think that's any excuse.
Unfortunately, Mark, we have come to the end of our time together. It's absolutely fascinating. Tell people where they can find out more about you and where they can pick up a copy of your many books and indeed your latest work.
Well, it's very kind of you. Basically, my books are at markshawbooks.com. Markshawbooks.com. All of them are up there. You can take a look. And I tell people, buy a used copy or go to, you can go to YouTube, for instance. I'm pleased to say, I don't want to be bragging, but there are 15 million views of my presentations, interviews about those books up on YouTube. So you can do that. But please, after this broadcast, there's questions you're going to have. You may think I'm a real dope, whatever it is. I don't care. I've got almost 5,000 emails from around the world, and I get tips from people and all that. It's mshawin at yahoo.com. mshawin yahoo.com.
For now, Mark, thank you so much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.